Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Cinema A to B. Today, Ben and I are going to be talking about the Ridley Scott 2023 film, Napoleon, starring Joaquin Phoenix. Kind of a little mashup again of Joaquin Phoenix and Ridley Scott. And we'll see how we feel about it. So Ben, how do you feel about it?
What a dumpster fire of a film.
So I kind of led you with that intro, but I mean, that's pretty much what my expectation of this.
Oh, so a couple of problems here. Mainly is the fact that Napoleon's just not a likable guy. Even if you dive into the historical narrative, like he's just not. And this is faithful to that. But the idea that I would want to sit through 2 hours and almost 40 minutes watching a really unlikable character devolve basically is laughable. Like, why? His exploits are interesting, right? And that's kind of what makes him him. And when the movie is focused more on that, it held my attention. The first battle sequence is really good. And it misled me because I was like, it started off, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Yeah. And then after that, it was just a downward slide. And frankly, I'm proud to say I didn't turn it off, but I thought about it a couple times. I should say I did split it over 2 evenings. I was watching it late at night. I got sleepy, which is easy to do during this movie. Especially in the middle of it. And so I turned it off, paused it. I was like, I'm going to come back to it the next night. And I did. But it
didn't get any better.
No, it didn't. It did not.
Yeah.
How about you?
So I ended up going to see this in the theater. So saw it on the big screen. So I had no chance to pause it or come back to it a second night. Saw it with my good buddy Colin. So he and I went to see it. And dumpster fire is probably a little bit of a strong terminology for it, in my opinion. I don't think it was a dumpster fire. There's definitely been things that I've seen from 2023 that were a lot worse than this, but it definitely was not good. And a lot of different factors. There are moments of greatness that kind of were there, and I could see, Ridley Scott in it. But much like Martin Scorsese, in some of his latter works, like I feel like you don't still have the spark, or there's something that's missing, that you want to do this epic. Everyone, like, you're Ridley Scott, so we're not going to really challenge you on some of your decisions. I thought Joaquin Phoenix was a terrible decision as Napoleon for multitude of reasons. One, because his performance was basically Commodus from Gladiator, and it was just him the entire time. And Commodus only works as the villain against Maximus's hero. Like you said, I didn't want him to win. Like, I wanted Joaquin, I wanted Napoleon to lose at every ounce. Like, did not care about him, did not care about his story or anything that happened. Much like you, was more like, the battle sequences are cool, but other than that, this was a very boring film. And I think you and I kind of talked about it on Oscar night. Like, I'm very glad that this thing wasn't really up for many Oscars, because it shouldn't have. The only thing that I think that it was, and I think that you and I kind of talked about, it should have possibly won, or was at least good that got nominated for, was costume design, because the costuming and stuff like that was excellent in this. I mean, period pieces, it looked fantastic. It was shot really well. Dialogue wasn't terrible, but it wasn't interesting at all. Like, I wasn't like thrown off by the dialogue, but I also wasn't engaged in the story as well. And of course, I'm sitting through this, not getting to pause it, not getting to come back fresh. And so I'm having to watch this. And literally after the end of it, Colin and I look at each other and we're just kind of like, well, that wasn't very good. And what did we just watch, kind of a thing, which unfortunately that happened a lot in like we watched a bunch of movies in January. And I think out of like the 6 or 7 movies we saw together, like 5 of them were not very good. So like we were on this kind of like spree of just seeing not great movies. And this happened to be one of them. Now, I digress. There's, again, like I said, there's some great performances in them. Like, there is some characters who do well. There's some moments that are great, but overall, this is a forget it film. We're not going to be talking about this even 3 months from now. I mean, no one's talking about this film. The thing has got like a 6 something on IMDb. So I don't know. There's not much good to say about this film.
No, there's not. I don't think Joaquin really knew what to do with the character. He seemed to be kind of wandering aimlessly with it. He didn't really feel like he made any real commitment to how to play him. And so the thing's just sort of meandering. The lone bright spot in the film for me, as far as performance, is Vanessa Kirby.
Oh,
she's excellent.
Yeah,
she just has a screen presence and a very striking appearance to her anyway, where you kind of can't take your eyes off of her. But her performance is definitely, for me, was the best of the bunch. Mm-hmm. But I don't even know if I particularly agree with you on like that it was particularly well shot. I think the shot selection's good. I hate the color grade.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's way too desaturated for the most part for me. And goes kind of monochromatic in most scenes. I mean, if when he's in Egypt, it's just
very tan.
It's like it's almost it's not black and white, but it's just two-tone. And then some other places it's sort of, it just lacks the saturation that I would have preferred, but that's more of a aesthetic preference. Mm-hmm. I just didn't find it to be particularly attractive film. There's a couple scenes where it does look good. I mean, when they coronate him, the costumes and everything really pop. But outside of that, the opening battles at night, that looks fine. I think it looks like they did some day for night, which usually I don't particularly like, but that was actually pretty good day for night. And like I said, the opening battle sequence is terrific. And it really sets this false tone that you're in for a much better movie than it ends up being. But yeah, Napoleon, I didn't have a problem with him portraying Napoleon in kind of a negative or semi-negative light, because I think that's fairly accurate, but there just wasn't anybody to really root for. Now, I can tell you why I think he made this movie, and it has nothing to do with Napoleon. The whole thing feels like a message, not very preachy, pretty subtle, on the dangers of kind of the modern politician. He almost paints Napoleon as like the first celebrity politician. And we're in the throes of this now, in the US, and other countries are too, where these people that really aren't qualified come to power. Mm-hmm. And so from that standpoint, it's kind of an interesting watch. But that's kind of the only nugget I really pulled out of it. Was like, yeah, he's fantastic for the most part on the battlefield, but he has no business ruling a country, especially a country coming out of the French Revolution and all the complexities of that. Mm-hmm. He's just completely in over his skis. And that mirrors modern American politics, whichever side of the aisle you fall on. Mm-hmm. With the last, our current president and the Trumpster before that, is you have people completely out of their depth. You have people that have no business running the country. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to get partisan on this. I think it's true on both sides of the aisle. And so Napoleon kind of mirrors that, because he's just outside of the battlefield. He's an imbecile. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he is. Just absolutely.
And so I was kind of chuckling. I was like, I think that's kind of what Ridley's keying in on here, is this has been around for a long time. The celebrity.
The celebrity leader and stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah. And the dangers of that, of falling prey to that, and letting those people come into power. But I mean, that's all I could take from it. And
so I did not get that at all. I can 100% see that though. Like what you're trying to say of like, that's kind of his take on it. So I was so wrapped up in just kind of what is Joaquin doing? Because again, like I said, he's a lot like Commodus, but in a lot of ways, he's also just kind of, I felt like he's mixing his Joker performance in as well. Of like when he's on the battlefield, it feels a little bit like Commodus. And then like when he's not on the battlefield, it feels like sometimes he's the Joker. And I'm just like, your character profile just feels weird. Like it doesn't feel like it's the same person when you're in these two different areas, of like when you're not on the battlefield and then when you're on the battlefield, which I mean, could actually be a good decision. Like kind of like you're talking about, like when he's on the battlefield, this is what he knows. When he's not that, but that didn't come across, at least to me. It just felt like a very not really thought out performance. And outside of you know, and obviously it's a movie about him. He's in pretty much most of the scenes, if not all of them. And it's just like, it felt not great.
Yeah, and the movie feels not great. I mean,
yeah, that's so true.
There are many moments of it's very uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah,
most of his interactions with Vanessa Kirby as Josephine are super uncomfortable to watch. I mean, it's like this poor woman, you know, dealing with this guy, and she didn't sign up for any of this. But I could only kind of stand so much of that. And it kept happening, and I was just like, geez, he's like a, you know, he paints him as this petulant child, basically away from the battlefield. On the battlefield, he's the master of his domain, but his personal life is a mess. He really doesn't know what he's doing when it comes to, I mean, he basically just raids the coffers and lives high on the hog.
And that's very typical of
many
of those people. Now, and if they had done a better job of connecting those dots, of going, you know, make it seem like he's trying, but he really is way out of his depths, which, I mean, they did a little bit, but I can tell you right now, like, I mean, if I didn't know anything about Napoleon, I wouldn't have that much information. I wouldn't be able to like really connect those dots or figure that out with what is trying to go, like what is going on here. And like you said, if it's this big whole thing of like, here's the, you know, the start of the American politicians or those kind of thing that we're dealing with, like that was super subtle, which is great. You know, we're not, neither of us are big fans of preachy films, but I didn't get it. You know, I walked out of the, you know, so it's like you are missing something. Like there's something missing here. And it's one of those things there's a lot of things that are just slightly wrong with it. But, you know, I think, like I said, there's a lot of things. It's not, I've seen a lot worse movies, like a lot of movies that are done worse. I think we even talked about some of these movies on this podcast, but there's just so many missing pieces that would make this a much better movie if it was done correctly. And I think honestly, one of them is Joaquin needs to go. You got to get somebody else in there.
They should have gone back to the source material on Napoleon, which is, you know, his portrayal in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. and
and his love for ice cream.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Everything would have been fine.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to know what it is.
And it's way too long.
It's too long. It doesn't really work as a biographical piece on Napoleon for me. It starts too late in the game. And that's the other problem, right? Is Joaquin is too old to be playing this role, at least from where they come in on Napoleon. By the end, he's actually very much age appropriate. And there is some subtle growth in the character. By the end, it's very subtle, but my frustration is that he just falls upward. Like,
but again, that's what happens, you know.
That's what happened, and so, but it's not enjoyable to watch.
No,
this guy fall up. It's not. It's infuriating. So as a watch, sorry,
I'm going to cut you off a little bit, but like. I think I agree with like a lot of different aspects of what you said, but I think honestly, if they started even earlier, because at the point where they start, he is already kind of, I don't know if he's a general, but he's a well-renowned,
he's a major or something like that.
Yeah. Like he's got some experience. People like respect him as a military man to do these things. Like if we had kind of started even earlier, and maybe it's one of those things of we see his genius as a military man and kind of builds up. Now I'm extending the film, obviously, because it's already a super long film, but we kind of build up where we see him.
What the hell? Make it 3 hours.
Yeah. We see him as as he starts out his military career, and we build up and we see his genius in his military career. I can connect with that. And so then I could follow him along if he thinks he can be a better leader or whatever, and he becomes a much more likable character. But we start off way too late he's already passed all of that. And he's just kind of accepted as military leader. So we have to take that, but we don't feel that. And I think that could be one of the issues that we run into, is that we're missing a large beat of what should connect us to the character. That's it. Again, if Ridley Scott wants us to be sympathetic with Napoleon, which I think he does in some form or fashion. Otherwise, you know, why waste so much time?
To a certain extent, yeah, he is. There are moments where he is very much a pawn, and he doesn't, from the outset, his intent isn't really to become emperor of France. Like, that's not his aspiration. He just wants to conquer everybody.
He wants to be Alexander
and it's not even, it doesn't even seem to be conquering for the sake of like acquiring land or possession, or it's purely to have the V or the W on that particular battlefield.
Yep.
That's what drives him. So that stuff's fairly interesting. And there are battle sequences. Are they fighting Austria when they drive those guys into the
lake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Yeah.
And that whole sequence is probably the peak of the movie for me, because you do get to see the brilliance of his military strategy with these formations and where he flanks from and the deception. And I wanted more of that because I'm a guy and that's what I like to watch. And frankly, Ridley Scott's usually really good at that kind of stuff anyway. But there was less of that in the movie than there is Napoleon, 1 minute fawning over Josephine and then the next minute, like, completely disowning her. So there's way more of that than there are these interesting battle sequences. And then the battles themselves kind of struggle a little bit with a more fake aesthetic, because there's so much blue screen and composite work, because there aren't as many extras actually out there as you think. And I don't know if he's rectifying that when he's making Gladiator 2 now. By the way, the budget ballooned on that from 175 million to 310.
Of course. Though I will say I'm still holding out reservations for Gladiator 2, especially after.
I don't think it's going to be good.
No, especially after the last couple of stuff that Ridley has done. I mean, as much as I love his work, the last really great movie that I think that he's done has been The Martian. Since then, I mean, it's been
2015, so it's almost 10 years.
Yeah, almost 10 years since he's done a really good movie, and I love The Martian. But I also know this has been a passion project for his. I mean, he's been trying to tell this story, or at least do something on Napoleon, for years as well. I know at some point, like, Jack Nicholson was a part of this, or not a part of, obviously, the film that we just saw, but a part of this,
loosely attached,
loosely attached, or something like that. So I mean, it's been around for a while, but it's funny to me of, like, I remember walking out of the Fablemans, of watching the Fablemans, and going, even though I don't think it's his best, I still walked out going, that Spielberg still got it. He still knows how to tell a compelling story. And looking at Scorsese and looking at Scott, and I'm going, you don't like. I don't think you still have it. Like, and obviously we both know how difficult it is to make a great film. There's something that Spielberg does. His misses are few and far between. Which
my complaints on Spielberg is not whether he still has it or not. It's the projects he's picking. Ridley, I think, has kind of lost the touch. Yeah, for a multitude of reasons. I think a lot of it's kind of taking the easy way on shooting some of these sequences and not doing the legwork with extras and stuff. Now the locations are obviously very accurate and sound, but I don't know. And then there's a lot of like secondary characters in this movie that I just don't care about. I couldn't even tell you who half of them are. Like, I was 2 hours in, and there's people I guess one of them was his brother or something. Yeah. But outside of that, I'm like, I don't know who any of these people are. Like, they're just not, they come in, they come out. It's kind of a lot to keep track of. And by that point, I probably wasn't that interested anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the only shining moment was when Ben Miles came in, who played Tay Colma from Andor. I was really happy to see him. It's like, come on, give him a little.
Calling Court. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So when he came in, I was like, hey, I know him. I did the whole Leo DiCaprio meme where he's just like, points at the. I was like, yeah, I know him. But I mean, like, don't know him, but you know, he's from
Right.
Andor, which is a fantastic project. But you know, anyway, so that's beside the point. So what basically we're boiling down to, Ben, is are you going to watch the 4-hour director cut that's on Apple TV Plus?
There's no. I made that mistake one time watching the Snyder cut. I'll never do that again.
No, don't do it.
So there's only one movie that I can make a recommendation for recently with as far as Ridley Scott, where I felt like the director's cut did fix a bunch of the stuff, which is Kingdom of Heaven.
Yes.
The director's cut on that is fantastic. Pretty much a different movie. I don't know that a director's cut is going to save this. I can't possibly imagine what has been added back in that would salvage this. I mean,
and 4 hours. I mean, you're talking like over an hour worth more. I mean, because Kingdom of Heaven was only like an extra like 20, 30 minutes, right? For the director's cut. It wasn't.
It's quite, I don't know. Yeah. I think it was a 3.5 hour movie, but
oof.
I don't know. What is it with these guys and they get older and they just want to release like 3-hour cuts of stuff?
Well, it's their craft, buddy. It's their craft. They don't want these producers or these studio execs telling them what they can do. You know, and the modern moviegoer, which there are none because they all watch TV shows on their iPhones. That's a generalization, of course, but the average moviegoer can watch a 4-hour movie, and I can tell you, as someone who still goes to the movies, no, I don't want to watch a 4-hour movie. Like, it's rough. Yeah,
no, exactly. And now, doesn't Spielberg, at least as a producer, have a Napoleon project in the works as a miniseries? I believe he does. And so I'll watch that, and that's probably going to be more like, 8 hours.
Yeah, but again, it's streaming,
so
and it's also a TV show. Like, yeah, so like we talk about these TV shows having are really like 8-10 hour movies, 12-hour movies, depending on how many episodes they have, depending on how long the episodes are. But each episode kind of generally has its own typical structure of, like the rising action, climax, falling action. Depending on where the climax comes, it may be right at the end and be a cliffhanger or something, but you do have the typical structure to kind of follow things around to gauge your interest. You may have one or two that doesn't exactly follow that. It's not like you have rising action, rising action, rising action, rising action, rising action. I mean, you have the overall storyline. Sure, everything's building to usually the penultimate episode. If we're using Game of Thrones, it's usually always episode 9 or 8 or whatever is the second to last, obviously. And that's where your big climax happened, and you wrap things up in the last episode. But you still kind of have this like rise and fall. I mean, I'm going to bring up Andor again because it's a masterpiece. I love it. You love it too, so don't laugh at me. Like
Andor Bonaparte.
Andor Bonaparte. But like stuff like that where it's like you have these 3-episode arcs, which I think, and still the show tied itself together, but you kind of had this rising fall, rising climax, falling, right back into it, and that works. And so I always had that problem with like, it's like an 8-hour movie. I'm like, but it's not exactly. It there is a difference when you are doing that. Like I'm telling you right now, like we've been watching through FX's Shogun right now, which fantastic in my opinion. Having read the book, I think I'm really liking what they're doing. But each episode obviously can't stand on itself because it doesn't tell a full story. But there is definitely that at the end of it, I'm like, that was a good episode, or walking away happy. Like it is different. It is different.
Yeah, I guess so. I did look it up real quick, and Spielberg is working on in development is a Napoleon series, basically, and that is the impetus for what was the Kubrick dream project for Napoleon, and that was what Jack Nicholson was attached to.
Oh, was it? Okay, so I was wrong.
Yes, he wanted to do. Yeah, he was going to do Napoleon. Ended up doing Barry Lyndon instead, and then partnered with Nicholson on The Shining. But that was a goal project. So it's in development. Based on the reaction for this, they may just shelve it because they might just decide nobody's cares to watch.
My goodness,
8 hours on Napoleon. But
Jack Nicholson as Napoleon, oof, that'd be interesting. I'm glad that never materialized. No offense to people who are Jack Nicholson fans, and I enjoy Jack Nicholson, but not so much.
No.
Not so much as Napoleon.
It would be basically the same as casting
Joaquin Phoenix as Napoleon.
No.
Sorry.
No, it'd be worse than that.
So I read a thing going on it that, talking about this movie, that they filmed it pretty quick. They filmed it in like 2 months or something along those lines, like slightly over 2 months. I think it was like 60 some odd days or whatever, which for this kind of film, that's fast.
That's impressive.
That's really fast and impressive. And I got to say, like, maybe you should have done a little bit more pre-production work. Like, maybe take a look at that dialogue again. Maybe take a look at that story arc, maybe work with your actors a little bit more.
I was going to say, like, casting Nicholson as Napoleon would be no better than casting Christopher Walken as Napoleon. I mean, it would basically be,
or like casting Christopher Walken.
The speech pattern, the speech pattern's too defined, and it would have been a much more interesting watch though with Nicholson as Napoleon than Joaquin Phoenix. I mean, I
would have watched Walken as Napoleon as opposed to Phoenix. Waterloo. Shoot the cannons over there. He would have been riding high two big movies, one in 2023 as Napoleon and then Emperor and Dune 2, Oh, Walken. I honestly don't have a ton to say more about this film. It's definitely a miss, in my opinion.
It is. The issues start with the script and
go on down. I mean,
and this is the same guy writing Gladiator 2 and then Cleopatra. Mm-hmm. So I've got concerns. Mm-hmm. He did write The Last Castle, that 01 Redford movie, which is pretty good, but
I liked it.
And some other stuff, but he doesn't really have anything on his, and then I think he wrote some episodes of Man in the High Castle. But he didn't really have anything that jumps out to me on his filmography as a writer that would tell me that either Gladiator 2 or Cleopatra will be particularly good. Yeah, this is a pass for me, but like we always say, these aren't traditional movie reviews. So no. I wouldn't tell somebody to not watch it, but I'm just confident that the audience size for this, it's going to come out of it and be like, I really enjoyed that, is going to be really small.
Yeah.
It's not a very accessible movie at all. And unfortunately, we're just not in a period where these quote unquote period pieces, these big costume dramas, I think are even very popular. They seem to need some other component, or at least have characters thrust into overwhelming circumstances that are interesting, which is, why Gladiator is so fantastic, and frankly, why this isn't.
Yeah. And also, I think some of it is also the reliance too much on CGI. I mean, one of the things, like going back with Gladiator, Braveheart, with that, we didn't have that CGI characteristics. We're like, when you saw,
there's some in Gladiator. There's very little in.
Yeah, very little. But you're talking like at the overhead shots of like
the
Rome,
Colosseum.
Colosseum, that kind of stuff. But like with Braveheart, when you saw that many people on screen doing those fight, like those were actual people on screen. And so like that was, as a moviegoer before that time, seeing that, you're wowed by that many people. Whereas moviegoers now in 2024, CGI puts that up. It no longer are large crowds in interesting film aspect, because you're just like, well, 90% of that is digital and doesn't matter, and we kind of like desensitized to it. I think
I look at something like this and how long, Napoleon's been a known historical figure, and the odds that this was going to be good, I think the odds were always stacked against it, because the character's been around forever and there isn't like a standard bearer of a film based on Napoleon. So you would have really had to offer something new to the conversation for it to be great.
Yeah.
I mean, with Gladiator, it's a fictional character. And then it's even fictitious versions of Marcus Aurelius and Commodus. The timelines are all jostled. It doesn't matter. So you're able to build all the tension and drama, and you don't have to follow the historical documents, basically. So this was, he was going to be boxed in with this no matter what. But yeah, I don't really have much more to say on it either. I think we're kind of
in agreement with
it.
So basically, what we're trying to say here is go watch Andor, if you haven't already. So
That's like the default position. just go watch Andor.
If you haven't. Watch it a second time if you've only seen it once, come on. It's still great. No. Sorry.
I still have Apple TV Plus because of Masters of the Air. And so I was going to watch this. It's the same thing. I'm going to watch Ferrari, and I'm probably going to be disappointed too. Because I don't know if Michael Mann still has it.
Yeah, that's the question.
I think that wraps it up on Napoleon. We thank you for listening. Us kind of unfortunately trudge through this muck of a movie, and thank you for listening and watching on YouTube. And we will be back next week on Monday with I'm confident something we probably enjoyed a little bit more and more excited about discussing. But it's important for us to bring movies like this into the podcast. I don't want to ever have us only talking about movies that we really loved and liked.
Yeah. I
think there's value in discussing, because these are conversations we all have. We come out of a movie that we didn't particularly like, and we're just like, well, let's hash out what didn't work.
Yeah.
And there's value in that. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.